They laughed and said I'd forget my own name soon, and that they'd take my house when I did. I smiled, served dinner, and stayed quiet. That night, I pressed play on a video my late husband left behind. What happened next, they never saw coming. I used to think I had a close-knit family, the kind you see smiling in holiday cards, gathering around the dinner table, talking over each other with laughter in their voices. I thought that was us. But looking back now, I realize I mistook convenience for closeness, silence for respect. Maybe I knew the truth deep down, but when you're a mother, a grandmother, and especially a widow, you hold on to the fantasy longer than you should. My name is Miriam Cole, and I'm 68 years old. I live in Austin, Texas, in the same two-story brick house Henry and I bought nearly 4 decades ago. It's the kind of home with ivy climbing up the walls and a porch swing that creaks in the wind. It's full of memories, some I cherish, others that sting. I used to think I'd grow old in peace here, surrounded by people who loved me. But peace is not what I found. What I found instead was betrayal, quiet and sharp. Henry, my late husband, was a smart man, too smart for his own good, really. He was a contractor-turned-developer who knew how to turn one tired building into 10 profitable ones. He loved 2 things deeply: building things and protecting the people he loved. When he passed away suddenly from a heart attack 5 years ago, I thought my world had stopped. And in a way, it did. We were married for 41 years. I wasn't ready to be alone, and I definitely wasn't prepared for what came after. Our daughter, Sabrina, always had flair, drama, glamour, ambition. When she married Daniel, I'll admit I had reservations. Daniel was charming but too slick. He always talked about building a brand instead of building a life. But Sabrina adored him, and so I held my tongue. They had 2 children, Chloe and Evan. I loved them like life itself. After Henry died, I tried to stay involved in their lives, to keep some sense of family alive. I helped where I could, paid off Sabrina and Daniel's mortgage, covered Evan's college tuition at NYU, and even funded Chloe's graduate degree in fashion design. It didn't feel like a burden at the time. I wanted to help them succeed. I wanted them to be secure. I thought that's what Henry would have wanted too. Over time, the requests became regular. A new kitchen remodel, a business loan for Daniel's marketing firm, a luxury vacation for Chloe's birthday. I was happy to give, or at least I told myself I was. By my own accounting, I spent over $600,000 helping them in less than 5 years. But I never kept a formal record. That was my first mistake. The turning point, the moment everything began to unravel, was Chloe's wedding. She was marrying a nice enough boy named Travis. They rented out the Lakeside Pavilion, one of the most expensive venues in Austin. Sabrina told me they were stretching their budget and asked me to cover the balance. I did, of course. $52,000 for the venue and catering. No questions asked. The day of the wedding was warm, with a breeze coming off the lake. I wore a pale lavender dress, the same shade Henry always said made my eyes glow. I spent a little more time on my hair, wore the gold earrings he gave me for our 30th anniversary. I was nervous. Not sure why. Maybe I just wanted to feel like part of something again. When I arrived at the check-in table, a young woman with perfect lipstick greeted me. "You must be Mrs. Cole," she chirped, handing me a shiny badge. "Here's your name tag." I looked down. My stomach dropped. "The banker granny, swipe here for funding," it said in glittery gold letters, complete with a fake credit card chip drawn on the corner. I stared at it, not understanding for a second. Was this a joke? A mistake? Behind me I heard laughter, familiar laughter. Daniel was chuckling loudly, high-fiving one of his friends. "Told you Mom would get a kick out of it," he said. Sabrina leaned over and kissed my cheek, barely hiding her grin. "Isn't it hilarious, Mom? Chloe designed the tags herself. We all have funny ones." "Funny? Mine wasn't funny. Mine was cruel." I forced a smile. "Very creative," I murmured, pinning the tag to my dress with a hand that trembled slightly. Inside, the ballroom was stunning. White roses hung from crystal chandeliers. Live music floated through the air. Everyone looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. I mingled, smiled, nodded. But I couldn't stop looking at that name tag. People saw it, laughed, nudged each other. One man even said, "Wish I had one of you in my family." I don't remember much of the evening after that. I sat through the toasts, the first dance, the cake cutting. I watched my granddaughter glow in her gown, and I wondered how much of this celebration was truly hers, and how much of it I had paid for, unknowingly buying my place as a joke. That night, after I returned home, I took the name tag off and laid it on my kitchen table. I stared at it like it might offer some kind of answer. It didn't. But the doorbell rang not long after. It was Carla Freeman, our old friend and Henry's longtime attorney. She looked tired, like she'd come straight from a long meeting. "May I come in?" she asked. I nodded and led her to the kitchen. She reached into her bag and pulled out a white envelope, thick and sealed with wax. "Henry asked me to give this to you if I ever felt it was necessary," she said. My heart pounded. "Necessary?" She nodded. "He wrote a codicil to his will 6 months before he died. He worried about how things might change after he was gone." With shaking fingers, I opened it. The language was legal and cold, but the message was clear. Any family member who publicly humiliates or exploits Miriam Cole will be immediately disinherited. Their share will be redirected to heirs who demonstrate care and respect. I looked at Carla, stunned. "Why didn't you give this to me before?" "Because Henry hoped it wouldn't be needed," she said gently. "But I was at the wedding, Miriam. I saw the name tag. I don't remember falling asleep that night. I don't remember crying either. I just remember a hollow feeling in my chest, like something that had once been warm had gone cold. And yet, I didn't call Sabrina the next day. I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't demand apologies. Because I needed to know, was this just a bad joke? Or was it the truth finally revealing itself? So I waited. I watched. And in the days that followed, the answers came, louder than any name tag ever could. The morning after the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, that awful name tag still lying in front of me like a cheap little trophy of shame. I stared at it while the coffee brewed, the house too quiet for a Saturday morning. I thought about Henry, how he would have reacted if he'd been there. He didn't tolerate disrespect, not from anyone, not even family. He had a quiet strength, a kind of calm authority that made people think twice before crossing a line. That codicil he left behind? That was his voice speaking through time, still trying to protect me. I didn't act on it right away. Maybe I still didn't want to believe it was real. What had happened at the wedding, the laughter, the snide remarks. But within days, the mask started peeling off piece by piece. Sabrina called first. "Hi, Mom," she said sweetly. "Wasn't the wedding beautiful? You were amazing. Everyone loved having you there. Chloe especially appreciated everything you did. Speaking of which, there's something I wanted to run by you." And there it was. No hesitation, no pause. Just straight into it like it was expected. Travis's parents were supposed to cover the honeymoon. Santorini, 5-star resort, beachfront suite. But they've had some financial hiccups. Chloe's a little upset, and well, we were wondering if you could maybe step in. It's only $75,000 for the full package, and it would mean the world to her. I was quiet for a moment, letting her words settle. 75,000? I repeated slowly, not because I didn't hear it, but because I couldn't believe she'd said it out loud. Well, with flights, luxury accommodations, and excursions, you know how these things go. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the name tag on the table. "I'll think about it," I said, and I could hear the surprise in her pause. "Oh, okay, well, just let us know soon. They want to book this week for the discount." I hung up and didn't call her back. Instead, I opened the cabinet where I kept the financial files Henry and I had built over our marriage. I pulled out folders and papers, receipts and wire transfer slips. I sat on the floor, surrounded by the evidence of how much I had given over the years. The numbers stared back at me. College tuition for Evan, $180,000, Sabrina's mortgage payoff, $212,000, Chloe's apartment in New York, $94,000. And that didn't include gifts, vacations, credit card payments. I'd given them over $600,000, and they still saw me as a walking wallet. That same afternoon, Evan stopped by. He hadn't called, but that wasn't unusual. He often came by just to check in. I opened the door, and he hugged me, his tall frame warm and comforting in a way I hadn't expected to need. "Grandma," he said, pulling back to look at me. "Are you okay? I saw your face at the wedding, especially after that tag thing." So he'd noticed. "I'm fine," I said, leading him to the kitchen. "Just tired." He sat at the table, glancing at the papers I hadn't yet put away. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. About the way they treated you. It wasn't right. The whole vibe of that wedding felt wrong." I watched him for a moment. Evan was different. Thoughtful. Quieter than his sister, more observant. Maybe because he wasn't as wrapped up in appearances. "They think I don't notice," I said slowly. "But I do. I hear the way your father talks about my house. How it's too big for me now. How they'd help me downsize." He looked away, ashamed. "They've been talking about putting you in a place. Sunrise Heights or something. Said you shouldn't be alone at your age. And if you sold this house now with the market so high, it would help everyone. My blood ran cold. They weren't even pretending to be subtle anymore. I appreciate you telling me, I said, pouring us both tea. That takes courage. He nodded. I've been thinking about something, Grandma. I want to start a nonprofit. Something for teens, mentoring, support, community. I've been volunteering with this group downtown, and I feel like that's where I'm supposed to be. But I don't have the money to get it going. I studied his face. He wasn't asking like the others. There was no expectation in his voice, only hope. And that made all the difference. Show me a plan, I said. A real one. And if it makes sense, we'll talk. His eyes lit up. Really? I smiled. Really? After he left, I sat down and wrote in my journal for the first time in years. I wrote about Henry, about the name tag, about Evan. I wrote about the codicil and how it suddenly felt like a loaded gun in a velvet drawer, dangerous but powerful. That weekend, I met up with my old college roommate, Gloria. She was now running a small art gallery downtown. I told her about the art therapy group I'd joined and the paintings I was working on. She invited me to submit a piece for an upcoming community show. It's just a local fair, she said. But we're featuring artists over 60 this time. Call it the second bloom. You should show something. I hadn't thought of myself as an artist, not since my 30s. But maybe it was time to reclaim more than just my finances. Then came my 69th birthday. Sabrina insisted we do something low-key but elegant. I allowed it, curious to see what they'd try next. They came to my home, just the immediate family. Chloe was absent, on her honeymoon, funded by God knows who. Daniel brought wine, Sabrina brought a cake. We sat around the table after dinner, and Daniel clinked his glass with a fork. There's something we wanted to talk about, he said, glancing at Sabrina, who gave him a rehearsed smile. We've noticed you've been forgetful lately, Sabrina added. You left the oven on last month, and there was that thing with the mail. We're just concerned, Mom. Here it comes, I thought. Daniel leaned in, his tone faux soothing. We were thinking it might be smart for us to step in and help manage your finances. Nothing drastic, just a power of attorney arrangement. Protect your interests, make sure you're not overwhelmed. I sipped my coffee and looked at them both. I didn't speak. Then, from the far end of the table, Carla Freeman stood up. I think this is the moment we've been waiting for, she said calmly, pulling a familiar white envelope from her bag. Daniel's face changed immediately. What is that? Carla opened the codicil, placed her reading glasses on her nose, and began to read aloud. By the time she finished, the room was frozen. No one moved. Sabrina's face had gone pale. Daniel looked like he'd swallowed a stone. I set my cup down and finally spoke. From this point forward, I said, I make the decisions. About my home. About my money. About my life. You can't be serious, Sabrina muttered. You're cutting us out? No, Carla replied for me. Henry did. And you gave him every reason to. And just like that, the game changed. They thought I'd been a bystander in my own story. But they forgot who built this house, who raised this family, and who they were dealing with. After Carla read the codicil aloud, there was a silence so thick you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Sabrina stared at me like I had slapped her. Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I sat there calmly, holding my coffee cup with steady hands. Inside, I wasn't calm, I was burning. Not with rage, but with something deeper, clarity. For the first time in years, I saw them as they really were, not as I hoped they would be. Mom, Sabrina finally said, her voice strained. We didn't mean any harm. You know how Daniel jokes around. The name tag was just a bit of fun. You call that fun? I asked quietly. Publicly mocking me? At an event I paid for? Laughing as if my worth is measured by my bank account. She looked away. Daniel tried a different approach. Look, I think we've all overreacted here. This codicil or whatever. Henry was probably just being cautious. There's no reason to make permanent decisions based on one misunderstanding. Carla, still standing, answered. It's not a misunderstanding. This document is legally binding. And based on Miriam's account of recent events, including this very conversation, it's now enforceable. The words hit them like a slap. Daniel stood up, pacing. This is insane. You're cutting us out over a joke and a dinner conversation. No, I replied, looking him dead in the eye. I'm reclaiming my life. There's a difference. They left soon after, with Sabrina giving me a cold kiss on the cheek and muttering something about how we'd regret this. I didn't even walk them to the door. Evan helped me clear the dishes, his movements quiet and respectful. When we finished, he turned to me. I had no idea Grandpa planned something like that, he said. I'm not sure they even believed he had the foresight. He always said he worried about what would happen if I outlived him, I murmured. He didn't want me to be used. Well, he saw something coming, Evan replied. And I'm glad he did. I told Evan that night that I'd like to support his nonprofit idea. But it wouldn't just be a check handed over casually. He'd need to write a detailed plan, work with a legal advisor, and go through proper filings. If he was serious, I'd help. But this wasn't going to be another blank check for another family fantasy. To his credit, he nodded without hesitation. That's more than fair, Grandma. I want to do it right. Over the next few weeks, the fallout from that dinner began to unfold. Sabrina sent me a long email, half apology, half accusation. She said I had embarrassed the family, that I had turned a small issue into a public spectacle. She tried to appeal to sentiment. We've always depended on you, Mom. You were our foundation. But her words rang hollow. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was sorry there were consequences. Daniel didn't bother to write. Instead, I received a letter from a law office representing them, questioning the validity of the codicil and requesting a reassessment of my mental state. It was a veiled threat, nothing more. Carla handled it swiftly, sending them a formal notice. Any further attempts to challenge the will would be met with legal action and full exposure of their behavior. Meanwhile, Chloe reached out from Santorini, thanking me for everything and saying the trip had been life-changing. I didn't reply. I wasn't ready. Whether she was truly unaware of what her parents had done or simply went along with it, I didn't know yet. I needed time to figure that out. My days changed. Slowly, I started living for myself again. I joined the local community center, not as a donor or a sponsor, but just as Miriam. I took more art classes, even submitted 2 paintings to Gloria's gallery. One sold within a week, a landscape I'd done from memory of a place Henry and I used to walk. I cried when I saw the red sticker on the frame. Not because of the sale, but because I'd created something someone else wanted that wasn't tied to money or obligation. It was mine. Evan visited weekly. Sometimes we talked about his nonprofit plans, which he'd named North Star Haven. Sometimes we just had tea and talked about nothing, music, news, memories of Henry. His presence soothed something in me. He never once brought up money unless it was directly related to his project. I appreciated that more than he knew. Then, one rainy afternoon, Chloe appeared on my porch unannounced. She looked nervous, her umbrella dripping, makeup smudged. I invited her in, out of the storm. We sat in the living room, and she didn't say anything for a long time. Just looked around the room at the photos, the books, the little bits of our family history scattered on shelves. I didn't know about the name tag, she said finally. Not until I saw it on you that night. I was furious. I told Mom and Dad it was disgusting, and they laughed it off like it was no big deal. I said nothing. I'm not proud of how I acted, she continued. I should have said something louder, or pulled you aside. But I was caught up in the wedding, the people, the pressure. And I didn't want to make a scene. I looked at her, seeing both the little girl I once took to piano lessons and the woman in front of me, now married, living in a world I no longer recognized. I don't hate you, I said gently. But I don't trust you yet either. She nodded. I understand. We talked for a while longer. She told me she and Travis were already having problems, that the honeymoon had only highlighted how little they had in common, that she was tired of always pretending everything was perfect. I didn't offer advice. I just listened. That was new for me. I used to jump in, offer solutions. But now I was learning the power of silence. Before she left, Chloe turned to me at the door. Do you think we can start over? I think we can start slowly, I replied. After she left, I stood by the window, watching the rain ease into a soft drizzle. My life, once a blur of pleasing others, was beginning to take shape again. And not one built on fear or guilt, but one rooted in choice. I never responded to another one of Sabrina's emails. I didn't answer when Daniel tried calling from a blocked number. Carla advised me that the codicil, combined with Henry's estate trust and the documentation she had collected, was nearly airtight. But still we watched. We waited. Because people like them, when they lose access to power, they don't fade away quietly. They plot. And I needed to be ready for whatever came next. But for now I painted. I gardened. I met Gloria for coffee and listened to live jazz at the park on Sundays. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rebuilding. And the foundation? It was finally mine. Spring had arrived in Austin, and for the first time in years, I could feel it. Not just in the air or the flowers blooming in the garden I had neglected for so long, but inside me. Something soft and steady was growing again. It wasn't joy exactly, but it was peace. And peace, I'd learned, is stronger than happiness. Peace stays. I spent my mornings with a paintbrush in hand, afternoons reading or walking through Zilker Park, and evenings either alone with a good meal or sharing dinner with Evan. Sometimes he brought friends from his volunteer group, young people with big dreams and soft voices. They reminded me of the future. Not one I'd buy for anyone, but one I could help plant the seeds for. Evan's nonprofit idea was blossoming. He had written a full proposal, registered the organization, and found a small building to lease downtown. It wasn't much, just an old bookstore with creaky floors, but it had charm and character. And he had a vision. A safe space for teens who needed more than advice. Somewhere to learn, to connect, to belong. I gave him the startup funding as a conditional investment. He insisted on repaying me someday. I didn't argue. Let him dream. It was his sincerity that mattered. Then came the letter. Thick envelope. No return address. Just my name neatly printed. I opened it on the porch. Inside were legal documents, new ones. A petition for conservatorship. My breath caught. I read the first few lines and had to sit down. Sabrina and Daniel had filed a formal request to have me declared mentally unfit. They claimed I was easily manipulated, emotionally unstable, and financially reckless. Their evidence? The donation to Evan, the codicil enforcement, and, get this, my increased interest in painting and art fairs, which they claimed was erratic behavior for someone grieving a spouse. I laughed. It came out bitter and short. Then I stopped laughing. This wasn't a joke anymore. They weren't going to go away quietly. They wanted control. Control of me, my house, my money, my life. Carla came over that afternoon. We sat in my study as she read through the documents. They won't win, she said calmly. You're competent. You've taken steps, documented everything, and I've kept records of every attempt they've made to intimidate or pressure you. I thought maybe they'd accept it, I admitted. I thought, after the codicil, they'd just let go. Carla shook her head. People like Daniel and Sabrina? They don't accept no. They only see it as a challenge. We filed a response with the court immediately, including letters of reference from my doctors, art instructors, neighbors, and even Evan's nonprofit board. Still, the hearing was scheduled, and I had to prepare to stand in front of a judge and prove that I was of sound mind. That I wasn't the one who'd lost my way, they were. The weeks leading up to the hearing were tense. Chloe reached out again. She hadn't known about the filing, and was furious when she found out. She left me a voicemail. I don't agree with what they're doing. I want you to know that. It was a small thing, but it mattered. She was waking up slowly, painfully, to who her parents really were. One evening, Evan brought over a mock-up of the logo for North Star Haven. It was simple, a lighthouse against a night sky. I wanted something that said, "You're not lost forever," he explained. "Just because you're drifting doesn't mean you can't find your way." I looked at him, and suddenly I saw Henry in his eyes. That same quiet drive, that strength that didn't shout but built. "Your grandfather would have been proud of you," I said softly. "I hope so," he replied. The night before the court hearing, I barely slept. Not because I doubted myself, but because the thought of standing in a courtroom while my own daughter argued that I was mentally unfit, it chipped away at something deep inside me. There's a kind of betrayal that burns past the point of anger. That leaves you numb. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Navy blue suit, gold brooch from Henry, a silk scarf I'd bought during a trip to Montreal 20 years earlier. Not to impress anyone, but to remind myself who I was. I didn't need to prove it to them. I needed to walk in that courtroom feeling like myself. Carla met me there. Evan came too, sitting behind us in the gallery, his face calm but watchful. Sabrina and Daniel sat on the other side, smug and polished. They looked like a power couple straight out of a magazine. Until they opened their mouths. The hearing was brutal. Their attorney painted a picture of a grieving widow in decline, manipulated by a cunning grandson, wasting her money on emotional whims. He even brought up the painting I'd sold at the community fair, as if it were some sign of instability. Carla countered with precision. She showed evidence of my daily routines, my finances, my medical evaluations. She submitted the nonprofit documentation, the structured investment I had made, and statements from 3 professionals who had worked with me recently, including a psychologist who testified that I was not only sound of mind, but thriving. Then I spoke. I talked about Henry, about the name tag, about the moment I realized my family didn't see me as a person anymore, just a purse. I described how it felt to be laughed at, dismissed, spoken over, and how I had chosen, with clarity and calm, to take my life back. The judge listened, asked questions, and after a long pause made his decision. There is no evidence of mental incapacity, he said. The petition is denied. I exhaled. Carla squeezed my hand. Sabrina stood up, red-faced. Daniel looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. But I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just stood, gathered my things, and walked out of that courtroom with my head held high. Outside, Evan hugged me hard. You did it, he said. No, I replied, we did it. After that, everything changed. Sabrina and Daniel moved out of Austin a few weeks later. I heard they were staying with an old business friend of Daniel's in Miami, trying to figure out their next move. Chloe and I started meeting for coffee. Slowly, she was starting to understand how far her parents had gone. She had questions. I didn't have all the answers, but I told her the truth. Every time. Evan's nonprofit opened its doors to the public on a sunny Saturday. There was no big press release, no ribbon cutting, just a gathering of people who cared, who wanted to help. I brought lemon cake. Evan introduced me as the one who believed before anyone else did. I smiled, but I stayed quiet. This was his day. Later, standing in the quiet corner of that little converted bookstore, I ran my fingers along a bookshelf and thought of Henry. Of how he would have stood in this room, proud and quiet, probably pretending he wasn't emotional while blinking too fast. That night, alone in my house, I sat on the porch and listened to the wind move through the trees. For once, it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. It felt like freedom. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what tomorrow would bring. Sometimes I still think about that courtroom. The way Daniel clenched his jaw when the judge denied their petition. The way Sabrina blinked rapidly, trying to hold back whatever emotion was threatening to escape. Anger, embarrassment, maybe even shame. And yet, what I remember most is the quiet in my chest afterward. I had walked into that room afraid I'd lose something, but what I lost instead was the fear itself. It was gone. And in its place was something firmer, resolve. Life after the hearing didn't return to normal, because normal was never coming back. But a new rhythm took its place, one I built with my own hands. I no longer had to worry about what strings were attached to every phone call, every visit. The silence from Sabrina and Daniel was loud at first, almost theatrical. Then it faded, replaced by quiet updates trickling in through Chloe. They're angry, she told me during one of our lunches at the coffee shop near the river. Mostly at each other, I think. Dad blames Mom for not warning him about the codicil, and she blames him for being too aggressive. I listened without offering much. I didn't need to analyze it. I'd spent years excusing their behavior, justifying it in my head. But now I saw it for what it was, an alliance of convenience. They loved what I could give them, not who I was. Chloe, on the other hand, was changing. I could see it in the way she softened when she spoke to me now, the questions she asked, not about money, but about family history, my marriage to Henry, what I loved about painting. It was cautious, this rebuilding of trust, like two people testing the strength of a new bridge before stepping fully onto it. But it was progress. Meanwhile, Evan's nonprofit, North Star Haven, was becoming a quiet force in the community. Word spread fast, volunteers joined, donations trickled in, and local businesses began offering support. He hosted weekly teen workshops and had even hired a counselor part-time. I went to visit one afternoon, and he was helping a 15-year-old girl write a resume. When he looked up and saw me, he grinned in that way that only genuine pride brings. She's applying for her first part-time job, he told me. Her mom lost work last year, and they've been struggling. She just wants to help. My heart ached in that beautiful way. The way it does when you know you're witnessing something real. Something right. Evan pulled me aside later that day. I have a surprise, he said, leading me upstairs to the old office space they'd cleaned out. I'm turning this into a mini gallery, he explained. Just local artists, mostly teens, but I want one of your pieces in here. Your lighthouse painting, the one from your sketchbook. I laughed. You want to hang my painting here? I do, he said. Because this place exists because of you. And that lighthouse? That's what you are to me. I didn't have the words then, so I just hugged him. Tight. A few days later, I was sitting in my living room, working on a new piece, an abstract piece this time, bold colors and long strokes, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I had started getting used to visitors again, the kind who didn't come looking for handouts. When I opened the door, I was surprised to see a man in a dark gray suit, his expression serious. Mrs. Cole, he asked. I'm Anthony Price. I represent an investment group out of Miami. Your daughter and son-in-law are currently working with us on a real estate development project. I nodded slowly. What does that have to do with me? They've listed your property, this house, as collateral. I blinked. Excuse me. He handed me a folder. Inside were copied documents, one of which appeared to show my signature, badly forged, approving the house as backing for a loan of $500,000. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. The gall. The audacity. They had forged my signature, used my home, my sanctuary, to fund some business scheme? It was more than betrayal. It was criminal. I didn't sign this, I said flatly. I didn't think you had, Mr. Price replied. Frankly, I had doubts when I saw it. That's why I came to verify. I've filed similar complaints before. I just needed to hear it from you. I handed the folder back. What happens now? That's up to you, he said. If you file a report, we'll investigate. They could be charged with fraud. When he left, I stood there for a long time. Not angry, not even shocked, but deeply, profoundly tired. Tired of hoping they would change. Tired of forgiving what was unforgivable. And that was the moment I knew it was time to act, not emotionally, not to get revenge, but to protect what I'd spent my life building. The next morning, I met Carla at her office. I told her everything. She didn't even look surprised. Just nodded and pulled out a legal pad. We'll start with a fraud complaint, she said. Then I'll contact the bank and the county clerk's office to freeze any action tied to the house. We worked late into the evening, going over every document. Carla moved quickly. And while the legal wheels turned, I focused on what I could control, my home, my art, and the people who still deserved my time. That weekend, Chloe visited again. She looked tired, but her eyes were clearer. They're desperate, she admitted. This project in Miami, it's falling apart. They were counting on investors who are now backing out. Dad's been yelling constantly. Mom just keeps saying you'll come around. I looked at her carefully. And what do you think? I think they're drowning, she said. And they want to drag you with them. There it was. The honesty I'd been waiting to hear. I told her what they had done, the forged documents, the fraud. Her face drained of color. I didn't know, Grandma. I swear. I believe you, I said. But belief only goes so far. What you do next matters more. She left that night with tears in her eyes. I didn't ask what she planned to do. That was her path to walk. A week later, the fraud case was in motion. Carla submitted everything, including handwriting analyses and a formal statement from the man who delivered the documents. The house was protected, and Sabrina and Daniel were officially under investigation. I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the trees. The wind carried the scent of jasmine from the garden. In my lap was the sketchbook I'd started after Henry died, half filled with fragments of thoughts, colors, and shapes I hadn't understood then. Now, I turned to a blank page and began to draw again. I wasn't just rebuilding. I was fortifying. And whatever came next, I was ready. The day the investigators arrived at Sabrina and Daniel's temporary condo in Miami, I was sitting at my dining table, painting. A bouquet of wildflowers sat in a mason jar beside me, and I was trying to capture the light falling through the kitchen window. My phone buzzed on the table, Carla's name flashing across the screen. They've been served, she said simply. I set my brush down and leaned back in the chair. I wasn't surprised. I had known this was coming, but still, hearing it made everything real in a different way. Did they say anything? I asked. Sabrina cried. Daniel tried to deny everything, of course. But we have enough, between the forged signatures, witness statements, and that investment rep's visit to your house. They don't have much ground to stand on. I thanked her and hung up. Then I just sat there for a while, staring out at the backyard. Henry's old garden shed still stood crooked at the back fence. He'd refused to fix it, saying, "It's got character. That man could find charm in broken things." It's funny, I used to see the best in people the same way. I thought love was about overlooking faults, forgiving again and again. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's permission. I didn't tell Evan right away. He had enough on his plate with North Star Haven, which was growing faster than any of us expected. A local news outlet had run a story on the youth center, featuring a photo of Evan and one of the teens, arms around each other, both smiling wide. Donations had doubled in a week. A retired teacher offered to lead free GED classes. A bakery down the street started dropping off unsold goods at the end of each day. It was becoming more than a project, it was becoming a movement. I didn't want the mess with his parents to distract him from that. Still, I knew I had to tell him soon. It was Chloe who came to see me first, this time with a different look in her eyes, firm, resolute. "I confronted them," she said, setting her bag down on the kitchen counter. "I asked them straight out if they forged your signature. Mom didn't deny it. She just said they were trying to secure your legacy." "Is that what they're calling it now?" I asked, pouring tea. Chloe gave a dry laugh. "Dad said you were overreacting. That you're blowing everything out of proportion and ruining the family." "I didn't ruin anything," I said. "They did. I just stopped protecting them from the consequences." Chloe nodded. "I told them I was done. I can't pretend anymore. I'm not proud of how long it took me, but I'm not going back." She meant it. I could hear it in her voice. It wasn't a performance. She'd finally stepped out of their shadow. I reached across the table and held her hand. "That's all I've ever wanted," I said. "Not money. Not loyalty bought with guilt. Just truth." Later that night, I called Evan. I told him everything about the documents, the fraud, the charges being filed. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I knew they were capable of a lot," he said finally. "But I didn't think they'd go that far." "They did," I said. "And now they'll answer for it. Do you want me to come over?" "No," I said gently. "I just needed you to know. I'm okay, Evan. Truly. I feel like I'm finally standing on my own ground again." "You've been standing for a while now, Grandma," he said. "Some of us just needed time to see it." The next few weeks passed in a blur. Court filings, interviews, statements. Carla managed everything with calm precision. I stayed out of the public eye as much as I could. The last thing I wanted was to become a tabloid story. Austin widow battles greedy family. No, this wasn't about drama. It was about dignity. One afternoon, I received a letter. A real one, handwritten. From Sabrina. "Mom, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I needed to write this. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve it. I don't know how we got here. Maybe it was small choices, bad assumptions, too many times putting money before love. I don't know. But I want you to know I'm sorry. Not just for the documents. For all of it. For forgetting you're a person, not a purse. For treating your love like a currency to trade in. I miss you. I miss Dad. I miss the woman who made cinnamon toast for me when I had nightmares. I don't expect anything, but I hope maybe one day we can talk." I read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it in the drawer by the kitchen phone. I didn't know what to feel. Grief, maybe. Because this apology came too late to change anything. I wasn't cruel. I didn't burn it. I didn't write back either. Forgiveness is a path you walk on your own before someone else joins you. And she hadn't walked far enough yet. Meanwhile, North Star Haven hosted its first annual fundraiser. Evan was nervous. He had asked me to give a short speech. Nothing flashy, just a few words as someone who believed in the mission. I wore a simple navy dress, the same brooch Henry had given me years ago. When Evan introduced me, he said, "This place exists because someone chose to believe in hope instead of fear. She's not just my grandmother, she's my lighthouse." I walked to the podium and looked out at the small crowd. Community members, donors, teens who had found shelter in Evan's dream. I didn't need notes. "I gave because I believed," I said. "But belief isn't enough. You have to protect what you build. And sometimes that means standing up to people you love. Not because you hate them, but because you finally love yourself enough to stop accepting less than you deserve." When I finished, they clapped. But more than that, they understood. That night, after everyone left, Evan and I sat outside the center, sipping leftover lemonade. He leaned back in the chair and looked up at the stars. "Do you ever miss them?" he asked quietly. "I miss the idea of them," I said. "The people I thought they were. But I don't miss the weight of pretending anymore." He nodded, then smiled softly. "You know, Grandma, I think you're the bravest person I know." I chuckled. "No, sweetheart. I just got tired of being scared." We sat there a while longer, the silence warm, not heavy. And in that quiet, I realized something. I hadn't just taken back my life. I'd begun writing a whole new chapter. One with no strings, no silence, no shame. And that, more than anything, was the greatest revenge of all. 1 year after the fundraiser, I stood in the doorway of North Star Haven, watching the late morning sun pour through the tall front windows. The center had come alive in ways even Evan hadn't expected. There were now weekly tutoring sessions, weekend art classes, and a reading program that partnered with the local library. A quiet buzz filled the air. Young voices, laughter, and that rare, steady kind of hope that doesn't shout, but settles gently in the corners of a room. I'd just dropped off a new set of bookmarks I'd painted for the community bookshelf when Chloe walked in, holding her newborn daughter in her arms. She had named her Helen after Henry. That simple gesture had brought tears to my eyes the first time she told me, and even now, I felt a warm ache in my chest seeing her again. "Hi, Grandma," she said, smiling. "I didn't think you'd be here this morning." "I was just bringing these," I said, lifting the little stack of bookmarks tied with ribbon. "Thought the kids might like something colorful." She walked over and kissed my cheek, gently balancing Helen on her shoulder. "She sleeps best in this place. Must be the calm." "She's got a strong name," I said softly. "She'll need it." Chloe's face grew serious. "Mom and Dad are still in Florida. The fraud case took a toll. Their business contacts have mostly pulled away. They sold the condo last month. Dad is doing some consulting now. They're surviving, but barely." I nodded, taking in the words without needing to comment. There was no satisfaction in their downfall, only distance. I had moved on, not because they didn't deserve consequences, but because I finally understood that healing and punishment were not the same thing. "They send a card on your birthday," Chloe added quietly. "I didn't bring it." "I didn't expect you to," I said. "But thank you for telling me." There was no bitterness between us anymore. Only honesty. Chloe had done the hard thing, separating from their influence. She had started therapy, moved into her own apartment, and even started working part-time at a community arts nonprofit. She wasn't asking for anything. She just wanted to rebuild, and I could meet her there. As she settled into a corner chair to feed the baby, Evan appeared from the back, holding a clipboard. "Perfect timing," he said, grinning when he saw us. "I wanted to run something by you both." He explained a new idea, a creative mentorship program for teens interested in writing, art, and music. It would mean reinvesting some of the center's recent grant money into hiring local artists to teach short-term workshops. "We'll need to be careful with the budget," he said, "but I think it could be powerful. These kids need more than food and tutoring. They need someone to show them their voice matters." I looked around the center, the bulletin boards covered in handwritten poems, the sketchbooks drying on racks, the shelf with donated instruments. I thought of all the versions of myself I had buried over the years to make room for others' comfort. The girl who once painted, the woman who once dreamed. And now, here they were, breathing again through the hands of strangers who had been given a chance. "I think it's a wonderful idea," I said. "How can I help?" Evan smiled. "You already have." Later that afternoon, as I walked home, the streets of my neighborhood felt different. Not because they had changed, but because I had. There was a kind of stillness in me now. Not the stillness of loneliness, but of contentment. My home, which they had tried to steal out from under me, now felt like it belonged to me more than ever. I had refinished the porch swing myself, replanted the garden with herbs and wildflowers, repainted the guest bedroom, and turned it into a studio. I didn't hear from Sabrina or Daniel after the fraud case officially closed. They avoided prosecution by agreeing to a full financial settlement, which included reimbursing legal fees and relinquishing any future claim to my estate. Carla said it was the best we could hope for without a full trial. I agreed. I didn't want their names tied to mine any longer than necessary. I had already given them more than enough years. Every now and then a holiday card would arrive, unsigned but in Sabrina's handwriting. I never opened them. I didn't need to. That part of my life was over. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's about releasing yourself from the burden of waiting for an apology that may never come. I didn't need their repentance to move forward. I had already built something better. One Sunday morning, I joined a group of senior artists at the park for a plein-air painting session. We sat in a semicircle, brushes and canvases balanced on our laps, the lake shimmering nearby. As I dipped my brush into a warm orange hue, someone asked me, "Do you ever wish you had done this earlier in life?" I thought for a moment, then said, "No. I think I had to lose everything I thought mattered to find what actually did." That evening, Evan and Chloe came over for dinner. We sat around the old dining table, the one Henry had sanded and stained by hand, and shared a simple meal, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and my lemon pie. Helen giggled from her high chair, banging a wooden spoon on the tray like a tiny conductor. After dinner, Evan offered to clean up while Chloe and I sat in the living room, flipping through one of my old photo albums. She pointed to a picture of Henry in his overalls, standing in front of the half-finished garden shed. "He looks so happy," she said. "He was," I replied. "He loved building things. He never cared how long it took, as long as it was strong enough to last." Chloe was quiet for a moment. "That's what you did too, didn't you? You built something that would last." I looked around the room. at the light filtering through the curtains, at the vase of hand-painted flowers on the mantel, at the quiet strength of the life I had chosen. Yes, I said. And this time I built it for me. The story I've told you isn't just about betrayal, or even revenge. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you were told to hide, setting boundaries without apology, and choosing to love from a place of strength instead of obligation. It's about understanding that dignity isn't something someone gives you. It's something you hold on to, even when it's not convenient. If you had told me 5 years ago that I would be here, independent, fulfilled, and finally at peace, I would have laughed. Or cried. But life has a way of reshaping itself when you stop resisting the truth. I'm Miriam Cole. I was a wife, a mother, a provider. And now I'm simply myself. And that, after everything, is more than enough.